In the quiet corridors of St. Mary's General Hospital, where the steady beep of monitors and whispered conversations between staff created a familiar symphony of healing, nobody suspected that one of their most dedicated nurses was harboring secrets that would soon attract the attention of federal agents.
Perimeter is set. Moving.
Sarah
Almost
Mitchell
there, don't
had worked
stop.
the night shift for 3 years, earning the respect of doctors and the gratitude of countless patients. Her gentle touch and reassuring smile made her seem like any other healthcare worker committed to saving lives. But, sometimes, the most dangerous people are those who appear the most ordinary, and, sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the most mundane places. What the FBI discovered about Captain Hayes would not only shock the medical community but reveal a web of deception that stretched from hospital hallways to military installations, forever changing how people viewed the trusted faces that care for them in their most vulnerable moments. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her stethoscope as she walked through the dimly lit corridor of St. Mary's General Hospital. The night shift was her domain, a world where she moved like a ghost through the halls, checking on patients, administering medications, and providing comfort to those who couldn't sleep. At 32, she had the kind of face that inspired trust immediately. Her auburn hair was always neatly pulled back, her scrubs impeccably clean, and her voice carried the perfect balance of authority and compassion that made patients feel safe. The other nurses often commented on how Sarah seemed to have been born for this job. She never complained about the long hours, never seemed rattled by medical emergencies, and had an uncanny ability to anticipate what doctors needed before they asked. Dr. Peterson, the chief of internal medicine, had once told the nursing supervisor that Sarah was the kind of employee every hospital dreams of having. She was reliable, skilled, and genuinely cared about her patients. But Sarah's colleagues didn't know about the small apartment across town where she lived alone, surrounded by medical textbooks that went far beyond what a registered nurse typically studied. They didn't know about the secure laptop she kept hidden in her bedroom closet, or the encrypted phone that buzzed with messages at odd hours. Most importantly, they didn't know that Sarah Mitchell wasn't actually her real name. The woman who walked the halls of St. Mary's had been carefully constructed over the course of 2 years. Every detail of her background had been meticulously planned and executed. Her nursing credentials were real, earned through intensive study and training, but the person who earned them had a different identity altogether. The transformation had been so complete that sometimes she almost forgot who she really was before becoming Sarah Mitchell. On this particular Tuesday night in October, Sarah was caring for a patient in room 314 when her encrypted phone vibrated twice in her pocket. This was the signal she had been waiting for. After ensuring her patient was comfortable, she slipped into a supply closet and read the message that would change everything. It contained an address, a time, and a single word: Hayes. Captain Michael Hayes had been on her radar for 6 months. A decorated Army officer with 20 years of service, Hayes was currently stationed at Fort Richardson, about 40 miles from the city. On the surface, he was everything the military valued in an officer. He was disciplined, respected by his subordinates, and had served 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan with distinction. His record was spotless, which made him perfect for what he was really doing. Sarah had first encountered Hayes's name in a classified intelligence briefing that had been forwarded to her through secure channels. The briefing detailed suspicious financial transactions linked to overseas accounts, encrypted communications with foreign nationals, and a pattern of behavior that suggested Hayes was selling military secrets to hostile foreign governments. The evidence was compelling but not conclusive enough for a traditional investigation. That's where Sarah came in. Her real name was Agent Rebecca Torres, and she worked for a specialized unit within the FBI that handled cases requiring deep cover operations. The unit was small, secretive, and dealt with threats that couldn't be addressed through conventional law enforcement methods. Rebecca had been recruited 5 years earlier, fresh out of Quantico, because of her unique combination of skills. She had a degree in nursing, was fluent in 3 languages, and had demonstrated an exceptional ability to assume false identities. The Hayes operation had required her to establish herself in the local community where he lived and worked. Intelligence indicated that Hayes frequented St. Mary's Hospital, where his elderly mother received regular treatment for a chronic condition. By becoming a nurse at the hospital, Rebecca could observe Hayes during his visits, build a relationship with him naturally, and potentially gain access to information about his illegal activities. For months, she had been patient, watching and waiting for the right opportunity. Hayes visited his mother every Tuesday evening after his duty hours. He was devoted to her, spending hours by her bedside, reading to her, and ensuring she was comfortable. It was during these visits that Rebecca noticed something interesting about Hayes's behavior. He was nervous, constantly checking his phone, and seemed to be looking over his shoulder as if he expected to be followed. The intelligence community suspected that Hayes was planning something significant, possibly the sale of classified information about upcoming military operations. The stakes were enormous. If Hayes was indeed selling secrets, American lives could be at risk. Enemy forces could use the information to plan attacks or to compromise ongoing operations. Rebecca's mission was to get close enough to Hayes to gather the evidence needed to stop him. The message on her encrypted phone contained details about a meeting that Hayes was scheduled to attend the following evening. Intelligence sources had intercepted communications suggesting that Hayes would be transferring crucial information to a foreign contact at a restaurant downtown. This was the opportunity Rebecca had been waiting for, but it would also be the most dangerous part of her operation. As she deleted the message and prepared to return to her nursing duties, Rebecca felt the familiar tension that came with high-stakes undercover work. She had spent so long being Sarah Mitchell that sometimes the line between her real identity and her cover became blurred. But tonight, she needed to remember that she was Agent Rebecca Torres, and the success of her mission could determine whether American soldiers lived or died. The next evening, Rebecca arrived at her shift as usual, but her attention was focused on the events that would unfold later that night. Hayes's mother was scheduled for some routine tests, which meant Hayes would likely visit the hospital. This would give Rebecca the perfect opportunity to interact with him naturally while gathering any last-minute intelligence before the crucial meeting. As the evening progressed, Rebecca found herself thinking about the complexity of her situation. She genuinely cared about her patients and had come to love the work of nursing. The irony wasn't lost on her that while she was pretending to be someone else professionally, she was discovering parts of herself that she hadn't known existed. The compassion she showed to patients wasn't an act, and the satisfaction she felt when she helped someone heal was entirely real. But she also understood the weight of her real responsibility. Somewhere out there, soldiers were depending on her to protect them from threats they might never even know existed. The information that Hayes was potentially selling could lead to ambushes, failed missions, or worse. Every day she spent building her cover and getting closer to Hayes was a day closer to potentially saving lives. Around 10 o'clock that evening, Rebecca saw Hayes walk through the hospital's main entrance. He looked tired, as he always did after long days on the base, but tonight there was something different about his demeanor. He seemed more alert, more focused, as if he was mentally preparing himself for something important. As he made his way to his mother's room, Rebecca positioned herself to cross paths with him naturally. Their interaction was brief but significant. Hayes mentioned that he had been feeling stressed lately and asked if there was anything the hospital could do to help his mother sleep better. Rebecca suggested some mild relaxation techniques and offered to check on his mother more frequently during her rounds. Hayes seemed grateful for the attention, and, for a moment, Rebecca found herself genuinely wanting to help this man who was so devoted to his mother, even as she knew she was working to destroy his life. As Hayes left the hospital that night, Rebecca knew that within 24 hours, everything would change. The meeting that intelligence had discovered would either provide the evidence needed to arrest Hayes, or it would confirm that their suspicions were wrong. Either way, Sarah Mitchell's time at St. Mary's Hospital was coming to an end, and Agent Rebecca Torres would soon have to emerge from the shadows to complete her mission. The restaurant chosen for the meeting was Giuseppe's, an upscale Italian establishment in the downtown district that attracted a mix of business professionals and tourists. Rebecca had arrived 2 hours early, posing as a customer enjoying a quiet dinner alone while she surveyed the location and identified potential exit routes. She sat at a corner table with a clear view of the entrance, occasionally glancing at her phone as if waiting for a text message, but really monitoring the secure communication device that would alert her to Hayes' arrival. The intelligence team had provided her with detailed photographs of Hayes' suspected contact, a man named Viktor Petrov who claimed to be a cultural attaché at the Russian embassy but was believed to be a senior intelligence officer. Petrov was in his late 40s, distinguished-looking, with graying hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from years of operating in foreign countries under diplomatic cover. The FBI had been tracking his movements for months, building a case that would eventually expose an entire spy network. At exactly 8:30, Hayes entered the restaurant. He was dressed in civilian clothes, but his military bearing was unmistakable. Rebecca watched as he was led to a table near the back of the restaurant, away from the main dining area where most customers were seated. He ordered a coffee and checked his watch repeatedly, clearly nervous about what was to come. Rebecca activated the recording device concealed in her purse and adjusted her position to get the best possible view of Hayes's table. Petrov arrived 15 minutes later. He approached Hayes's table with the casual confidence of someone who had attended thousands of such meetings. The two men shook hands briefly, and Petrov sat down across from Hayes. From her vantage point, Rebecca could see that Hayes had brought a small manila envelope, which he kept on his lap throughout the initial small talk. The conversation appeared friendly on the surface, but Rebecca could see the tension in Hayes's shoulders and the way his eyes darted around the restaurant. The breakthrough came when Rebecca activated the directional microphone that intelligence technicians had installed in her phone. The device was experimental, capable of isolating conversations from background noise with remarkable clarity. As she pretended to scroll through social media, she was actually recording every word of the conversation happening 30 feet away. Hayes was explaining that he had access to deployment schedules for the next 6 months, including detailed information about troop movements and logistical operations. Petrov listened intently, occasionally asking questions about specific dates and locations. The Russian agent was particularly interested in a planned operation in Eastern Europe that was scheduled to begin in 3 weeks. Hayes mentioned that the information he was providing could help Petrov's government anticipate American military activities and potentially gain strategic advantages. Rebecca felt a chill as she realized the scope of what she was witnessing. This wasn't just about selling routine military information. Hayes was providing intelligence that could compromise active operations and put American soldiers in immediate danger. The deployment schedules he was discussing included units that would be operating in hostile territory, where advanced knowledge of their movements could lead to coordinated attacks. As the conversation continued, Petrov produced a small electronic device that he handed to Hayes. Rebecca recognized it as a secure communication device, probably encrypted and designed to allow Hayes to transmit information directly to Russian intelligence handlers. In exchange, Petrov handed Hayes an envelope that undoubtedly contained cash payment for the intelligence he was providing. The transaction was quick and businesslike, but its implications were enormous. Rebecca continued recording as the two men discussed future meetings and established protocols for ongoing intelligence sharing. Hayes would have access to increasingly sensitive information as his unit prepared for deployment, and Petrov made it clear that his government was willing to pay substantial amounts for continued cooperation. They arranged to meet again in 2 weeks, at a different location, where Hayes would provide updated deployment schedules and tactical information. As the meeting concluded, Rebecca faced a critical decision. She could follow Hayes and attempt to apprehend him immediately, but that would risk compromising the larger investigation into Petrov's spy network. Alternatively, she could continue surveillance and gather more evidence, but that would mean allowing Hayes to potentially provide more classified information to foreign agents. The weight of the decision was enormous, and she knew that whatever choice she made would have far-reaching consequences. Rebecca chose to follow Hayes as he left the restaurant. She maintained a discreet distance as he walked to his car, parked in a nearby garage. Hayes appeared relaxed now that the meeting was over, but Rebecca could see him checking the envelope Petrov had given him. As he drove away, Rebecca activated her emergency communication device and transmitted a coded message to her FBI handlers requesting immediate backup and surveillance support. The response came quickly. Within an hour, Hayes's car was being tracked by multiple surveillance teams, and electronic monitoring equipment was capturing his phone conversations and internet activity. The FBI was now in a position to monitor Hayes's every move while gathering additional evidence about his espionage activities. Rebecca's role was shifting from undercover observation to active participation in building the case against him. Over the next week, Rebecca continued her duties as a nurse while coordinating with FBI investigators. Hayes visited his mother twice during that period, and each time, Rebecca engaged him in casual conversation designed to elicit information about his state of mind and future plans. Hayes seemed increasingly confident, even cocky, about what he was doing. He mentioned to Rebecca that he was considering taking early retirement from the army and moving somewhere warm where he could enjoy a more comfortable lifestyle. The comment about retirement was particularly significant because it suggested that Hayes was planning to make a substantial amount of money from his espionage activities and, then, disappear before he could be caught. Intelligence analysts believed that Hayes was probably planning to sell information for several more months before vanishing, possibly to a country that didn't have an extradition treaty with the United States. Meanwhile, surveillance teams were gathering evidence about Petrov's activities and identifying other members of his spy network. The Russian agent was in contact with at least 3 other American military personnel who appeared to be providing classified information in exchange for money. The investigation was expanding beyond Hayes to encompass what appeared to be a sophisticated espionage operation targeting multiple branches of the American military. Rebecca found herself in the strange position of having genuine feelings of sympathy for Hayes's mother, who was entirely unaware of her son's criminal activities. The elderly woman often spoke proudly about Hayes's military service and his dedication to protecting his country. She had no idea that her son was actually betraying everything he had sworn to defend. Rebecca struggled with the knowledge that when Hayes was eventually arrested, his mother would be devastated and would likely never understand how her beloved son had become a traitor. The psychological pressure of maintaining her cover while gathering evidence was beginning to take its toll on Rebecca. She had been living as Sarah Mitchell for nearly 3 years, and the line between her real identity and her assumed identity was becoming increasingly blurred. She found herself genuinely caring about her patients and feeling guilty about the deception she was practicing on her colleagues, who trusted her completely and considered her a valued member of their team. At the same time, Rebecca was acutely aware that every day Hayes remained free was another day that American soldiers were potentially at risk. The information he was selling was time-sensitive, and enemy forces could use it to plan attacks or develop countermeasures against American operations. The urgency of stopping Hayes was constantly weighing on her mind, even as she tried to maintain the calm, caring demeanor that her nursing role required. The second meeting between Hayes and Petrov was scheduled to take place at a hotel bar across town. Rebecca would again be positioned to observe and record the transaction, but this time, FBI agents would be in position to potentially apprehend both men if the evidence gathered was sufficient to justify arrests. The stakes were higher because if something went wrong, both Hayes and Petrov might realize they were under surveillance and could disappear before the full extent of their spy network could be exposed. As Rebecca prepared for what could be the final phase of her undercover operation, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. She had started this mission thinking about it purely in terms of catching a traitor and protecting national security. But her time as Sarah Mitchell had taught her about the complexity of human nature and the unpredictable ways that people's lives intersect. She was about to play a role in destroying Hayes's life and breaking his mother's heart, even though both outcomes were necessary to protect countless other lives. The Grand Plaza Hotel's bar was busier than Giuseppe's had been, which provided better cover for Rebecca but also made surveillance more challenging. She positioned herself at the bar itself this time, dressed in business attire that made her look like any other professional unwinding after a long day. The FBI surveillance team had placed agents throughout the hotel, some posing as guests, others as staff members, creating an invisible net around Hayes and Petrov. Rebecca nursed a glass of wine while monitoring the communication device that would alert her when Hayes arrived. She had spent the afternoon at the hospital, working her regular shift and trying to maintain the normal routine that had defined Sarah Mitchell's life for the past 3 years. But tonight felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that everything was about to change dramatically. Hayes arrived at the hotel bar at exactly 9 o'clock, just as he had the previous week. He looked more confident this time, walking with the stride of someone who believed he had control over his circumstances. He chose a table in a relatively quiet corner and ordered a beer while waiting for Petrov. Rebecca could see that he was carrying a larger envelope this time, suggesting that he had access to more extensive classified materials than before. Petrov arrived 20 minutes later, but something was different about his appearance and demeanor. He seemed more alert, constantly scanning the room as if he suspected he might be under surveillance. Rebecca noticed that he had chosen a different route through the hotel to reach the bar, and he spent several minutes observing other patrons before approaching Hayes's table. These were the behaviors of an experienced intelligence officer who was beginning to sense danger. The conversation began normally, with the same kind of casual small talk that had characterized their previous meeting. But Rebecca could see through her surveillance equipment that Petrov was asking Hayes pointed questions about whether he had noticed anything unusual lately, whether anyone had shown unusual interest in his activities, and whether he was confident that his security hadn't been compromised. Hayes assured Petrov that everything was fine, that he had been careful to avoid detection, and that he was confident that no one suspected his activities. He handed over the large envelope, explaining that it contained detailed information about a joint military exercise involving American and NATO forces that was scheduled to begin in 2 weeks. The intelligence included troop positions, communication protocols, and logistical information that would be invaluable to any foreign government seeking to monitor or interfere with the exercise. Petrov examined the contents of the envelope carefully, occasionally asking Hayes to explain specific details or clarify particular pieces of information. Rebecca could see that the Russian agent was particularly interested in the communication protocols, which would allow his government to potentially intercept or jam American military communications during the exercise. The implications were staggering, as compromised communications could lead to coordination failures that might cost lives. As the meeting progressed, Rebecca noticed something that made her blood run cold. Petrov was taking photographs of the documents with a small camera, but he was also making copies using a portable scanner that he had concealed in his briefcase. This suggested that the intelligence was being distributed to multiple recipients, possibly including foreign military units that could use the information to plan attacks or develop countermeasures against American forces. The exchange of money happened quickly, with Petrov handing Hayes an envelope that was noticeably thicker than the one from their previous meeting. Hayes briefly counted the cash and smiled, clearly pleased with the increased payment for his treachery. The two men then spent several minutes discussing their next meeting, scheduled to take place in a different city where Hayes would be attending a military conference and would have access to even more sensitive information. Rebecca was preparing to signal the surveillance team when something unexpected happened. Petrov suddenly stood up and walked directly toward the bar where she was sitting. For a moment, she thought her cover had been blown and that the Russian agent was approaching to confront her. Instead, Petrov ordered a drink and stood just a few feet away from her, close enough that she could hear him making a phone call in what sounded like Russian. The phone conversation was brief, but Rebecca's language training allowed her to understand that Petrov was reporting to his handlers about the success of the meeting and confirming the arrangements for distributing the intelligence he had acquired. More troubling was his mention of other American sources who were providing similar information, confirming that Hayes was just one part of a much larger espionage network. After finishing his phone call, Petrov returned to Hayes's table for a few more minutes of conversation before both men prepared to leave. Rebecca watched as they shook hands and walked toward different exits, following predetermined protocols designed to minimize the chance that they would be seen leaving together. She immediately activated her communication device and transmitted a coded signal indicating that the meeting had concluded and that both subjects were leaving the hotel. The FBI surveillance teams followed both men as they left the hotel, maintaining discreet observation while avoiding any actions that might alert them to the ongoing investigation. Hayes drove directly to his apartment, where electronic surveillance equipment captured him making phone calls to confirm his attendance at the military conference scheduled for the following week. Petrov went to the Russian embassy, where he disappeared behind diplomatic barriers that prevented American law enforcement from observing his activities. Over the next 48 hours, FBI analysts worked around the clock to analyze the intelligence that Rebecca had gathered and to piece together the full scope of the espionage network that Hayes and Petrov were part of. The investigation revealed that at least 6 American military personnel were providing classified information to foreign agents, and that the intelligence being sold included some of the most sensitive operational details imaginable. The decision about when to make arrests was complicated by the fact that allowing the spy network to continue operating meant that more classified information would be compromised, but moving too quickly might prevent investigators from identifying all of the conspirators. Rebecca found herself at the center of these discussions, as her continued access to Hayes through his hospital visits to his mother provided a unique opportunity to gather additional intelligence. During this period, Rebecca experienced some of the most intense psychological pressure of her career. She was continuing to work as Sarah Mitchell, caring for patients and interacting with colleagues who had no idea about her real identity or the momentous events unfolding around them. At the same time, she was participating in daily briefings with FBI analysts and helping to plan the eventual arrests of Hayes and his co-conspirators. The breakthrough came when electronic surveillance detected Hayes making plans to attend a military conference in Washington, D.C., where he would have access to classified briefings about upcoming operations in multiple theaters around the world. Intelligence analysts realized that if Hayes attended this conference and shared what he learned with foreign agents, the damage to American national security could be irreparable. The decision was made to arrest Hayes before he could attend the conference, which meant that Rebecca's undercover operation was about to come to an end. She would participate in one final interaction with Hayes at the hospital, during which she would help gather last-minute intelligence about his plans and, potentially obtain evidence about other members of his spy network. The final hospital visit took place on a Thursday evening. Hayes's mother had been scheduled for some routine tests, and Hayes arrived at his usual time to spend a few hours with her. Rebecca engaged him in what appeared to be casual conversation about his upcoming travel plans, his work at the base, and his general outlook on life. Hayes was remarkably open, perhaps because he viewed Rebecca as nothing more than a friendly nurse who cared about his mother's well-being. During their conversation, Hayes mentioned that he was excited about the opportunities that his upcoming conference would provide, and that he was looking forward to learning about developments that would be valuable to a lot of people. The comment was cryptic, but, in the context of what investigators already knew about his activities, it was essentially a confession that he planned to sell whatever intelligence he gathered at the conference. Hayes also mentioned that he had been in touch with some international friends who were interested in his work and who had been very generous in their appreciation for information he had shared with them. Again, the language was carefully chosen to avoid directly admitting to espionage, but the meaning was clear to anyone who understood the context. As the evening progressed, Rebecca found herself feeling genuinely sad about what was going to happen to Hayes's mother. The elderly woman had no idea that her son was a traitor, and, when he was arrested, she would be devastated and confused. Rebecca had grown fond of the woman during her 3 years at the hospital, and she knew that the arrest would likely worsen her already fragile health condition. When Hayes left the hospital that night, he had no idea that it would be the last time he would see his mother as a free man. FBI agents were positioned around his apartment building, and arrest warrants had been prepared for him and several of his co-conspirators. The 3-year investigation that had begun with Rebecca's assignment as an undercover nurse was about to reach its dramatic conclusion. The arrest was scheduled for dawn on Friday morning, but everything began unraveling at 3:30 a.m. when Hayes received an emergency phone call that changed the entire operation. Rebecca was at home, trying to get a few hours of sleep before what promised to be the most intense day of her career, when her secure communication device buzzed with an urgent message from the FBI surveillance team. Hayes had packed a suitcase and was driving toward the airport. Electronic intercepts revealed that someone had warned Hayes that federal agents were closing in on him. The source of the warning was unclear, but it suggested that either the spy network included someone with access to law enforcement intelligence, or that Hayes's foreign handlers had become aware of the investigation through their own surveillance activities. Either possibility was deeply troubling and meant that the entire operation was now at risk. Rebecca was immediately mobilized as part of the emergency response team tasked with apprehending Hayes before he could flee the country. FBI agents at the airport were alerted to watch for Hayes, but he had a several-hour head start and could potentially board an international flight before agents could locate him. The situation was complicated by the fact that Hayes had military identification that would allow him to bypass certain security procedures, making it easier for him to evade detection. The chase began in earnest when Hayes's vehicle was spotted by a traffic camera near the interstate highway leading to the airport. FBI agents coordinated with local law enforcement to establish roadblocks without alerting Hayes to the fact that he was being actively pursued. Rebecca found herself in the unusual position of participating in a high-speed law enforcement operation while still maintaining her cover as a nurse, as there was always the possibility that the arrest would fail and she would need to continue gathering intelligence. The pursuit took an unexpected turn when Hayes suddenly exited the highway and drove to a 24-hour diner in a small town about 30 miles from the city. Surveillance teams watched as he met with an unidentified woman who appeared to be waiting for him. The woman handed Hayes what looked like documents and a small package, while Hayes gave her an envelope that probably contained the classified materials he had been planning to sell at the upcoming military conference. Rebecca realized that they were witnessing the activation of an escape plan that Hayes had probably developed months earlier. The woman was likely another foreign agent who was helping him flee the country, and the documents she provided were probably false identification papers that would allow Hayes to travel under an assumed identity. The small package might contain cash, credit cards, or other resources needed to disappear permanently. The FBI faced a critical decision about whether to arrest Hayes immediately or to continue surveillance in hopes of identifying the woman and learning more about the escape network. The choice was made to move quickly, as allowing Hayes to leave the diner might mean losing him entirely. Rebecca found herself part of the arrest team, her cover about to be blown after 3 years of careful preparation. The arrest happened fast and without violence. FBI agents surrounded the diner while Hayes and the mysterious woman were still inside, cutting off all escape routes before moving in to apprehend them. Hayes looked shocked when agents identified themselves and ordered him to surrender, but the woman immediately began destroying documents, suggesting that she was an experienced operative who understood the importance of protecting intelligence sources. Rebecca watched from the parking lot as Hayes was led away in handcuffs, still wearing the casual civilian clothes he had put on when he received the warning call a few hours earlier. The man who had seemed so confident during his meetings with Petrov now looked frightened and confused, perhaps finally understanding the full scope of what he had gotten himself involved in and the severe consequences he was about to face. The woman arrested with Hayes refused to identify herself and demanded to speak with representatives from the Russian embassy, confirming suspicions that she was a foreign intelligence officer. The documents she had tried to destroy were partially recovered and provided valuable insights into the methods used by foreign agents to help American traitors escape justice. The false identification papers were sophisticated and would have been difficult for airport security to detect without specific training. In the hours following the arrests, FBI agents executed simultaneous raids on the homes and offices of the other suspected members of the spy network. Rebecca's intelligence gathering had provided crucial information about the identities and locations of these individuals, and the coordinated operation resulted in the arrest of 5 additional military personnel who had been selling classified information to foreign agents. The raids also uncovered evidence of a sophisticated intelligence operation that had been running for several years and had compromised an enormous amount of classified information. Foreign agents had been systematically recruiting American military personnel by identifying individuals with financial problems, personal vulnerabilities, or ideological sympathies that made them susceptible to espionage approaches. Rebecca's role in the investigation became public when she testified before a closed session of a Congressional Intelligence Committee about the methods used by foreign agents to recruit American traitors. Her testimony revealed the extent to which hostile foreign governments were actively working to penetrate American military and intelligence organizations, and the sophisticated techniques they used to avoid detection while gathering classified information. The psychological impact of ending her 3-year undercover assignment was more difficult than Rebecca had anticipated. She had genuinely enjoyed working as a nurse and had developed real relationships with her colleagues and patients at St. Mary's Hospital. The sudden revelation that Sarah Mitchell had never really existed was traumatic for people who had trusted and cared about her, and Rebecca felt tremendous guilt about the deception she had practiced on innocent people. Hayes's mother was among the most severely affected by the revelations about her son's activities. The elderly woman couldn't understand how the son she had been so proud of could have betrayed his country, and she blamed herself for somehow failing to raise him with proper values. Rebecca visited her in the hospital after the arrest became public, breaking her cover to provide what comfort she could to a woman who had become genuinely important to her. The conversation with Hayes's mother was one of the most difficult experiences of Rebecca's career. The elderly woman initially refused to believe that her son was guilty of espionage, insisting that there must have been some mistake or misunderstanding. When Rebecca gently explained the evidence against Hayes and her own role in gathering that evidence, the woman broke down completely, unable to reconcile the son she knew with the traitor he had become. Rebecca found herself trying to explain to Hayes's mother that people sometimes make choices that seem inexplicable to those who love them, and that Hayes's crimes didn't diminish the genuine love he had shown for his mother over the years. The conversation was heartbreaking for both women, as they struggled to understand how someone could simultaneously be a devoted son and a dangerous traitor. The media coverage of the arrests focused heavily on the sophistication of the spy network and the potential damage that had been done to American national security. Military analysts estimated that the classified information sold by Hayes and his co-conspirators could have compromised ongoing operations, endangered the lives of American service members, and provided hostile foreign governments with strategic advantages that might last for years. Rebecca was struck by the irony that her success as an undercover agent meant that the public would never fully understand the sacrifices she had made or the risks she had taken to protect national security. The FBI was careful to protect her identity and her methods, which meant that most people would never know about the 3 years she had spent living as someone else in order to catch a traitor. As the legal proceedings against Hayes and his co-conspirators began, Rebecca faced the challenge of transitioning back to her real identity while dealing with the psychological aftermath of her long-term undercover assignment. She had succeeded in her mission, but the cost had been higher than she had anticipated, both for herself and for the innocent people whose lives had been affected by the investigation. 6 months after the arrests, Rebecca found herself testifying in a secure federal courthouse where Hayes and his co-conspirators were facing charges of espionage, conspiracy, and treason. The trial was largely closed to the public due to the classified nature of the evidence, but the proceedings revealed the full scope of the damage that had been done to American national security over the course of 3 years. Hayes's defense attorney argued that his client had been motivated by financial desperation rather than ideological opposition to the United States, as if that somehow made the crime less serious. The lawyer painted a picture of a dedicated soldier who had made terrible choices when faced with overwhelming personal debt and family medical expenses. Hayes's mother's medical bills had indeed been substantial, but investigators had discovered that Hayes had actually been living well beyond his means for years, spending money on expensive cars, gambling, and a lifestyle that his military salary couldn't support. Rebecca's testimony was crucial to establishing the timeline of Hayes's espionage activities and demonstrating the systematic nature of his betrayal. She described her observations of Hayes during his hospital visits, the intelligence she had gathered about his meetings with Petrov, and the evidence she had collected about the broader spy network. Her 3 years of undercover work had produced a comprehensive picture of how foreign agents recruited and managed American traitors. The prosecution presented evidence showing that Hayes had sold information that compromised multiple military operations, endangered the lives of American service members, and provided hostile foreign governments with strategic intelligence that could be used against the United States for years to come. The classified information he had provided included details about troop movements, communication protocols, weapons systems, and operational plans that represented some of the most closely guarded secrets of the American military. During his testimony, Hayes showed little remorse for his actions, instead focusing on his belief that he had been underpaid by the military and deserved the money he had received from foreign agents. His attitude shocked even his own defense attorney and contributed to the impression that Hayes was an unrepentant traitor who would likely resume his espionage activities if given the opportunity. The trial also revealed the sophisticated methods used by foreign intelligence agencies to recruit and manage American sources. Petrov and his colleagues had carefully studied potential targets, identifying individuals with financial problems, personal vulnerabilities, or access to valuable information. They had developed detailed psychological profiles of their targets and had used specifically tailored approaches designed to overcome moral objections and security concerns. Rebecca learned during the trial that Hayes had not been Petrov's only American source. The Russian agent had been managing a network of at least 12 military and government personnel who were providing classified information in exchange for money. Some of these sources had been active for more than 5 years, meaning that the damage to American national security was far more extensive than initially understood. The sentences handed down by the federal judge were severe, reflecting the gravity of the crimes and the potential damage to national security. Hayes received a sentence of 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, effectively ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years, depending on the scope of their involvement and the value of the information they had provided to foreign agents. For Rebecca, the end of the trial marked the beginning of a new chapter in her career, but also the start of a long process of psychological recovery from her 3-year undercover assignment. The FBI provided counseling and support services designed to help agents transition back to their real identities after long-term deep cover operations, but Rebecca found that the process was more difficult than she had anticipated. The biggest challenge was reconciling the genuine relationships she had formed as Sarah Mitchell with the deception that those relationships had been based on. Her colleagues at St. Mary's Hospital had been devastated to learn that the person they had worked with and trusted for 3 years had never really existed. Some of them felt betrayed and angry, while others struggled to understand how someone could maintain such an elaborate deception while providing genuine care and compassion to patients. Rebecca made the difficult decision to visit the hospital one final time to speak with some of her former colleagues and patients. She wanted to explain, as much as she was allowed to, why the deception had been necessary and to assure them that her care and concern for patients had been entirely genuine, even if her identity had been false. The conversations were emotionally intense and didn't always go well, but Rebecca felt that she owed it to these people to face them directly. Dr. Peterson, the chief of internal medicine who had praised Sarah Mitchell's work, was particularly conflicted about the revelation. He understood intellectually that Rebecca had been performing a vital service for national security, but he felt personally betrayed by the deception. During their conversation, he told Rebecca that he had recommended Sarah Mitchell for several awards and promotions, not knowing that he was praising the performance of an FBI agent rather than a dedicated nurse. The impact on patients was equally complex. Many of them had formed genuine emotional connections with Sarah Mitchell and felt confused and hurt to learn that the person who had cared for them during vulnerable moments had been living a lie. Rebecca tried to explain that her compassion and concern had been real, even if her identity had been false, but some patients found it difficult to accept that distinction. Hayes's mother presented the most heartbreaking case. The elderly woman's health had deteriorated significantly following her son's arrest and conviction, and she never fully recovered from the shock of learning about his crimes. She died 8 months after the trial ended, and Rebecca attended the funeral, where she was one of only a handful of mourners. Hayes was not allowed to attend his mother's funeral due to security concerns, adding another layer of tragedy to an already devastating situation. Rebecca found herself reflecting on the moral complexities of her work and the unintended consequences of even successful operations. She had accomplished her mission of identifying and stopping a dangerous spy network, potentially saving the lives of American service members and protecting vital national security information. But the success had come at a significant cost to innocent people who had become collateral damage in the fight against espionage. The FBI recognized Rebecca's exceptional work with commendations and promotions, but she found that the accolades meant less to her than she had expected. The 3 years she had spent as Sarah Mitchell had changed her in ways that she was still trying to understand. She had discovered a genuine passion for nursing and healthcare that had nothing to do with her FBI career, and she had learned things about herself that she might never have discovered otherwise. A year after the trial ended, Rebecca made the surprising decision to leave the FBI and pursue a career in nursing under her real identity. The agency was disappointed to lose such a talented undercover agent, but her supervisors understood that the psychological toll of deep cover work could be severe and that agents sometimes needed to change direction to maintain their mental health and personal integrity. Rebecca enrolled in a nursing program to update and formalize the skills she had developed during her undercover assignment. She found that she genuinely loved the work and that her FBI training had given her unique insights into human behavior that made her an even more effective healthcare provider. She specialized in trauma care, working with patients who had experienced violence, abuse, or other traumatic events that required both medical treatment and emotional support. Several years later, Rebecca received word that Hayes had died in federal prison, apparently from a heart attack brought on by the stress and poor health conditions of incarceration. She felt a complex mix of emotions about his death, recognizing that justice had been served but also remembering the devoted son who had visited his mother faithfully despite the terrible crimes he was committing. The case remained classified for national security reasons, which meant that Rebecca could never tell the full story of her 3-year undercover operation. She sometimes wondered what would have happened if Hayes had chosen differently, if he had reported the foreign recruitment attempt instead of accepting it, or if someone had intervened before his espionage activities began. But she also understood that her work had prevented potentially catastrophic damage to American national security and had likely saved lives. In her new career as a nurse, Rebecca found a different kind of satisfaction than she had experienced as an FBI agent. Instead of catching criminals and protecting national security, she was helping individual people heal from trauma and recover from illness. The work was deeply personal and immediately meaningful in ways that her FBI career, despite its importance, had never been. The skills she had developed as an undercover agent served her well in her nursing career, particularly her ability to read people's emotions and motivations and to build trust quickly with patients who were frightened or suspicious. She found that her experience living as someone else for 3 years had given her unique insights into the masks that people wear and the hidden struggles they face. Rebecca never regretted her decision to join the FBI or to accept the assignment that led her to become Sarah Mitchell for 3 years. The work had been vitally important, and she was proud of the role she had played in protecting national security. But she also never regretted her decision to leave the FBI and pursue a career that allowed her to help people heal rather than to catch them in criminal activities. The story of Agent Rebecca Torres and her 3-year operation as Nurse Sarah Mitchell remained largely unknown to the public, classified among the many secret stories of ordinary people who make extraordinary sacrifices to protect their country. But, for Rebecca, the experience had been transformative in ways that extended far beyond her professional accomplishments, teaching her about the complexity of human nature, the cost of deception, and the healing power of genuine compassion.